Hey, so I just want to share a few things about truth and fiction. There's a lot of discussion about so called fake news, and largely we focus on fake news as either being the lies that are coming out of a politician's mouth, especially the current White House, or a particular channel of media, again, especially like Fox and OAN. And that's certainly factual to make the assertion that there's false narratives that come out of specific institutions or individuals because of personal agendas. But I want to point out two other kinds of fake news that we also have to be careful about. One of them is bad data. You hear a lot of talk lately about, well, I'm an empiricist or I'm a scientist or I'm some kind of a scientific professional and therefore we follow the data. And that can be a valid thing to say, but only if the data is good. Data, the word data doesn't mean truth. Data is just a description of a type of information. Just because something's numbers and quantified or exists in a database doesn't mean it's factual. As a matter of fact, we're constantly under a deluge of really, really bad data. And I'll just give you two examples. One, which is very dominant, is these numbers that are constantly flashed up on the screen about coronavirus cases and deaths. The numbers that we're seeing, especially in the US, as far as I know, because I'm not sure what's going on in terms of other organizations counting the numbers, but certainly within the US, these numbers are pure fiction. They are absolutely the most corrupt and untrustworthy type of data that really you can imagine, right? I mean, we're certainly not doing enough testing to know how many coronavirus people have a coronavirus in the United States, and we're certainly not testing enough people who have died to determine how many deaths are caused by coronavirus. As a matter of fact, there was just a case where a woman had to have her dead husband tested to confirm that he died of coronavirus. I mean, if she hadn't have pushed so hard for that testing, he certainly wouldn't have been counted. And, that's just one case. So there's an example of numbers that are constantly flashed on our screens. And even though we may realize they're false, if they keep getting shared as numbers, it doesn't matter how much you hear people say, well, that number doesn't include this, or that number we can't really trust because of testing. It becomes the truth no matter what kind of footnotes you put on it because the numbers are flashed. So that's one example of bad data. And another example of bad data is using the stock market, right, the Dow or the S&P, as an indicator of how the economy is doing today. I mean, it's a completely ridiculous number. All it has to do with, it's just a metric of how, aggregated capital is speculating about the future value of securities in large corporations. How can that possibly relate to anything about the economy? And again, a lot of you are hearing this and you know this to be true, but it doesn't change the fact that that number is sitting at the bottom left-hand corner of our TV screens day in and day out. So again, no matter what footnote we put on it, we start to read it as real data. And I'm not just saying this because I've got something against those two numbers. Anybody who's worked in the IT field for any period of time knows that data quality is a pervasive issue in everything we do. That's why you get, junk mail that has your name misspelled, or you get offers for something that you have no interest in whatsoever, right? Data quality is so bad that actually most people who work in data analytics professionally, if they're any good at their jobs, spend more time dealing with data quality issues than they do applying the algorithms to the data that actually gives them the answers they seek. So again, one type of fake news is what comes through the media and politicians and anybody else who wants to promote falsehoods for their own agenda. Another kind of fake news is bad data. And a third one that I think is very important is bad framing. And again, these tend to be sort of culturally pervasive messages that are pushed so much that even though we can prove that they're empirically false, they become true. Give you a couple examples of those. There's a narrative about the American American frontier, that it was explored and settled and founded by people who, didn't need the government and were, independent and tough and all this stuff. Now, it's certainly true that to have started a farm somewhere out, in Kansas in the late 1800s was, some tough work. But let's remember that that was specifically a government program of land grants that opened up the frontier, right? So the notion that the people who went there were independent of the government is really silly, because their land was granted to them by the government. And I think we can make a lot of parallels where, a lot of people will claim about being sort of, self-made millionaires, or having done something without the government help, without seeing the fact that, well, actually, no, you got a lot of help from the government. The government built the roads. The government runs the post office. The government provides the policing you need to have the social stability in order to build your business. So this framing of, the government independent, hardy individual really doesn't stand up, right? And I think we have a lot of those framings in certainly our country, where we talk about this ideal of what America is, and then what we do is we footnote it. We footnote it with the genocide of the First Nations, and we footnote it with the enslavement of Africans, which then continues obviously into racism and Jim Crow. And we footnote it with the McCarthy era and the Red Scare. And we footnote it with the poverty in the inner cities. And I think what happens is when you start to build up enough of those footnotes, you realize the footnotes actually outweigh the thing you're footnoting. And yet we cling to these ideas because it's the way that they're sort of normatively, culturally, narratively presented. So with those three ideas, that there's fake news, which is fake news per se, that there's fake news, which is bad data, and there's fake news, which is just really bad framing that becomes, again, dominant cultural narrative, despite the fact that it's empirically disprovable. I think we can all be on guard to have clear thinking, and to, when we communicate, to avoid saying things that aren't true, right? All these things we say, like to tell little kids they can be whatever they want to be. No, they can't. To say age is just a number. No, it isn't, right? To say that whatever it is that it is, these little truisms that come out of our mouth, that more people were killed in the name of religion than anything else. I mean, that's kind of an interesting proposition to make. World War I was, not fought between Anabaptists and Calvinists warring over a matter of congregational doctrine, right? Nationalism and tribalism is probably much more responsible for death than religion. Anyway, those are just some thoughts about trying to keep ourselves honed to the truth, even when it's kind of easy to fall into beliefs in bad narratives, bad framing, bad data, and of course the lies that come out of our various devices. Thanks.